It's 7:02 p.m., so I'll call this regular meeting of the Board of Education to order. Can you please call the roll?
Ms. Pearson?
Present.
Mr. Rollins? Ms. Mohammed? Mrs. McCulloch?
Prayer.
Mr. Siegel?
Prayer.
Here.
Mr. Connor?
Here.
Ms. Stanford?
Here.
With 5 present, 2 absent, we have a quorum.
Thank you. We'll now take a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. As we start each board meeting, I'd like to remind everyone that the mission of the Rockford Public Schools is to collaboratively engage all students in a first-class education for a changing world. And before we go any farther, I'd like to thank Connor Childers. Connor works behind the scenes to produce the board's broadcast via YouTube live stream and Comcast Channel 20. We are now at the petitions and communication portion of our meeting, when we invite the public to make comments. The board will not respond to comments at this time. If it is appropriate, you will be contacted in a timely manner by staff. Each speaker will be allowed no more than 2 minutes to address the board. It's not appropriate to address individual board members or individual administrators or discuss matters that would otherwise be confidential in such open meetings. If you look to your left, you'll see 2 digital clocks. One shows the total time allotted to comment, and the other is for each speaker. We have 2 speakers this evening. First, we have Ann Rundle, followed by Angel Brown. So, please.
On? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. My name's Ann Rundle, and I'm a retired educator from the Rockford Public Schools who's still concerned about the education our children are receiving. Today is election day, and my thoughts are centered on how we are teaching our children the importance of voting. Last week, a group of 45 people from the Rockford area participated in a civil rights bus trip to Alabama, and I was part of that bus tour. We learned a lot about the sacrifices of so many people in order that we all have the right to vote. As I was walking across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, I asked myself if a student who graduates from the Rockford Public Schools has learned the importance of voting rights and understands the sacrifices and the difficulties that people have made to ensure that all people can vote. I would like to recommend that the movie Selma be shown to every student that graduates from the Rockford Public Schools. And I would request that someone from the curriculum department contact me with information about how the history of voting rights is being taught. Thank you.
Our second speaker is Angel Brown.
Hello, my name is Angel Brown. I'm a parent leader. I'm a parent ambassador. I'm on the policy council for the City of Rockford Head Start. I'm an advocate for my children and other kids, and I'm also the voice for other people that's scared to speak up or don't know how to speak up. So the reason that I'm here is because in November of 2019, on the 20th, my daughter was jumped on by 2 white girls. And the problem with that to me is that they have my daughter as the aggressor when she was a victim. How do you have a fight in front of the school, on the side of the building, in the back of the bus, and nobody don't see anything, but when I just tried to separate them and to keep my daughter safe because no one was out there? So how could you have a building principal still employed there? So what's on the first description of the incident report should be on the police report too. So why is it two different stories? Because he falsified information and he lied, and it put me in a deep depression. You know, I could have lost my life. If I didn't have a strong background as I did, I could have been a drug addict. I could have been out here alcoholic. I could have been out here wilding out, hurting people because I was hurt. I did a big grizzly roar, and guess what? Nobody did nothing but push their hair back and wipe their face off. So this is not fair for me or my daughter to be discriminated and being biased by the head principal at Flynn Middle School. And also the coach pushed me. I was hurt. And I also want everybody to know that didn't know. If me and my family ain't never came together, we came together to get some money for a lawyer because it was ridiculous. That should never happen. Safety is number one. And what people did was try to push it under the rug. But I want everybody to know that the debris just blew out. And it makes no sense. Everybody should be treated with dignity and respect. And it makes no sense.
Thank you.
Okay, one other thing. My son, I have to fight for my son's safety at school. He's 5 years old. I got to teach him to be an advocate for himself. That's sad. We need to change this. A lot of difficult situations that need to happen so we can change the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is opportunity for comments from board members. Do any of the board members have any comments? Mr. Siegel.
Thank you. Since I was not here for the last meeting and didn't really get a good chance to publicly acknowledge the graduates of this year, was able to attend a couple of the graduations and watch the others, and was extremely proud of what I saw, what I heard, and the conversations I was able to have with the graduates as they approached the dais and afterwards. So really one of the beautiful moments of a school year that didn't have its share of beautiful moments. This was, of course, an extremely challenging year. You know, we heard of the challenges at Selma, and I guess I wouldn't say that anything that in this school year could have come close to the sort of violence and tension and mayhem that existed in that particular moment. But I'm hopeful that if we do have an opportunity to show Selma in our schools, that we have a different attendance experience than we've had this year. It has been troubling as the community has come to us talking about cases of discipline, and when we can look at students who are missing 80, 90, 100, 130 days, and these are not isolated, these are the we have many of these. It becomes incredibly disheartening, especially in the face of the efforts that the school district goes to get kids to school. So I truly hope that if we do present content of such historical importance, or of any importance whatsoever, that we have students who are present to absorb it. And I hope that there is as thorough of an advocacy for student attendance as there is for changes in how we do discipline. The changes are coming, and the changes have been made. Let's get our students in school. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Siegel. Anybody else have comments? I'm going to mention that there's a new box. I was looking for it. I didn't see it. Anyways, when you retire a flag, especially as we approach another important holiday here with the 4th of July, but there is a flag box for flags that need to be retired, which has been put down in the lobby by, it's actually the Boy Scouts of America take care of that. And once a year, they do a ceremony where they retire all the flags and they're burnt. I happened to attend that a couple weeks ago, and there were 5,700 flags that they had just for 1 year. So they were hopeful that by making it easy for people to have a drop-off point, that we will do that. And I'm going to I need to start doing this every meeting. There's not enough people here now. A reminder that if you do Amazon, and if you do Amazon Smile, you can choose an organization for a donation on each of your purchases, and our Rockford Promise is one of the organizations on that list. So every time I buy something from Amazon, a piece of change at least goes to Rockford Promise for the students that we saw out here after graduation, the ones standing here telling us that they had gotten scholarships and were going off to school, and anything we can do to support that, I think, is a positive. So, all right, we're now on to superintendent's comments. I'm going to give Dr. Jarrett the floor.
Before I invite Dr. Brown, Dr. Wolf, and Mr. Gallagher to give their presentation on Title I. I did provide a handout electronically, as well as there's a copy on the desk. And I did want to just really briefly review for the board in steps what we are planning to do for next year. In the month of July, I plan to share with you drafts of our 3 major committees and what those committee staff liaisons have in place in partnership with the board committee chairs. And so that will be coming in July. But for the month of June, Board President McCulloch and I have been hard at work on finalizing a governance plan for the year. Our governance committee, that's where we really handle the big retreats. And what is laid out here is what we've already done in June and July, which was our board self-evaluation and board planning retreat in June. In the month of August, we are planning on August 9th, the Chief Counsel evaluation. In October, we have planned our first Saturday retreat of the year on October 1st to do a real deep dive into how we did in opening the school year. That will flow through our performance monitoring committee, but we'll think of a lot of the operational issues that go with the school year. November is the annual Tri-Conference, which a number of you have committed to attending, where we meet with school board members across the state of Illinois. The month of December will be our second Saturday retreat, tentatively scheduled for December 10th. For those interested in a deep emphasis on how our schools are performing, we will spend time first reviewing, looking backwards in great detail, how our schools did during this current school year. We'll get some preliminary information long before that, but this will be sort of our summative look back after the embargo on Halloween. And we will also be able to see in December how our schools are doing at the midpoint on their standards of practice and how our school district office is doing for the 22-23 school year on our standard of service. So we'll get our first midpoint check-in. As we move into January, the board will conduct a semi-annual self-evaluation and also evaluate the superintendent. As we get into April, there are scheduled board elections, and we will be selecting new committee chairs. As we head into May, we're going to really emphasize onboarding new board members and new committee chairs in May. And then in June, we'll be back around again for another planning retreat as we have those new committee chairs in place. So this is what Mrs. McCulloch and I have laid out as a draft for the board to consider. We'll also go into greater detail with the 3 other committees in the month of July. Mrs. McCulloch, is there anything you would like to share with the board?
Well, one of my comments when we put this together was we don't know who will be on the board, what our makeup will be after April. So we obviously can't tell a whole new board, depending on who's here, what they have to do. So this is tentative. But also, as I look at the June self-evaluation, I think we might have to tweak that a little bit, because if we have a lot of new board members, it might really be time better spent onboarding than it would be evaluating, because if you haven't been on long enough, it's kind of tough to do an evaluation of somebody who's just been on a month. So those will be revisited, but up through April, it's pretty much in place. So the only other thing I'd add is to ask board members to at least mark their calendars. And I think we just have the 2 Saturdays, both the superintendent and the legal evaluations are done at night.
We do have a 3rd Saturday proposed for the board self-evaluation in January as well.
In January, okay. So we already did June, we're doing October, December, and January, I apologize, that's right. And I thought, and you can tell me, board members, what you think, that having a self-evaluation in January, which is 6 months plus down the road from our previous one, will give us an opportunity to have the pieces in place for the onboarding so that you guys can come up with any additional information before April comes around. And we'll be able to really evaluate how we worked with administration using this kind of schedule. So take any recommendations if you've had a chance to.
Please email me with any changes or suggested improvements in our calendar. But the idea is to start with the most strategic meetings first, and then we will work our way to our plan for our monthly meetings. And ultimately, we will also be committing to some topics for the superintendent's weekly update that you receive in writing. So all of that to come in July, but I wanted to start here with this first big piece. So please submit any questions or comments or suggestions. And now I'd like to turn the floor over to our team, Dr. Wolf, Dr. Brown, and Mr. Gallagher, to present at the board's request some additional information about how our Title I processes function. The floor is yours.
Green is on. That makes sense. I'm going to a Title I program now to learn how to use that. Thank you. We're here in response to a question from the board floor. What is Title I? And Title I is a really dense set of policies that drive programs. And so I'm glad to have a few minutes with my colleagues here. It really is a funding program that was born out of the 1965 War on Poverty. And 2 slides from now. All of these words really get to the purpose of it. That first part in Title I, Part A, the ESEA, was the War on Poverty. And it's to help schools and districts with higher percentages of low-income students meet challenging state standards. That second part of that, as amended by the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, gets to the parameters, what they're considering for allowable program cost, what standards to be addressed. Many people knew No Child Left Behind. ESSA was the law that amended how we adapt the ESEA when President Obama signed that in 2016. There's also another part of Title I, and that's 1003A, and that is an additional funding stream to help schools that are falling below certain benchmarks in a state's plan to meet the federal law. So who benefits from our Title I funding? The state wants all students to have a high-quality experience, just like our Board of Education and superintendent do. So the law says that all schools must have a school improvement plan. Some of the schools also receive additional funds in the Title I program, and they write a school-wide plan. We last were before the board a couple of years ago to have school-wide plans approved. Then that 1003A, or school improvement component, in the state plan, 20% of all Title I schools are identified for improvement. You, a couple of weeks ago, approved schools' plans on how they were going to address improving outcomes using 1003A. So all schools have a school improvement plan. Most of our schools have Title I school-wide, and a number of our schools have the additional funds. There are, of course, rules that come with federal dollars, just like any other federal or state program. So there are a lot of words up here. The biggest thing is we use Title I funds to supplement, not supplant. So every student gets the benefit of local and state funding. Title I schools receive additional funds. And the rules, the parameters around spending those funds are reasonable, necessary, and allocable. Reasonable is, would an everyday person think that it was a reasonable price for that? We don't want to spend $10,000 for a hammer. Is it necessary for the program, for the specific grant program? And then is it allocable? Meaning, can we charge it against the grant because of the targeted audience or the budget parameters? And what does that mean for our school district?
Okay, so what we have here is a summary of our current fiscal year dollars, the FY22 dollars, and you can see in the second column there, the current year allocation was what we received at the beginning of the school year, plus then we were able to carry over dollars from previous school years. You'll notice that there's a really, really big carryover number there, almost $10 million. That was due to the fact that there was all this supplemental money that was coming out with all the COVID programs. And so a lot of school districts were unable to spend title dollars because they had so many federal dollars from the CARES Act and ESSER 2 that they were spending. So they allowed us to carry over this amount of money on an unlimited basis. So you can see in total that what we had available this year was about $39.6 million. Now, kind of fast forward to what we're projecting for FY23, which is the upcoming school year that starts on, our upcoming fiscal year that starts on Friday. And you can see that our current allocation is around $23 million, and we believe right now that we're going to be back to what would be considered to be normal carryover dollars. So those carryover dollars are about half what we were able to carry over in previous years. So we were carrying over about 2 years worth of money in previous years. It doesn't look like we're going to be allowed to do that for the upcoming school year. So, you know, we will probably very likely drop down to that $27 million number for the title funding for the upcoming school year. So that's just kind of a synopsis of where we were this year compared to where we expect to be in coming years.
So those are the dollars. These are the schools that we serve. In the school-wide camp, those are schools that their direct certification list has at least 40% of the students making them an eligible population. The targeted assistance schools are 35 to 39.99%. And then not served are those schools with a population that is either under the 35% may serve threshold or are otherwise funded by grants. Our early childhood sites and our Roosevelt programs are largely funded by other grants, and they're not in the Title I program. We have a federal responsibility to serve eligible youth in our non-public schools. We currently provide educational services in 20 non-public schools, and they currently are the only ones in the targeted assistance file. In the 1003A, that school improvement portion, these are schools dating back to testing in 2018 and 2019. You can see targeted assistance. This meant that they had a subgroup that was below the threshold. The comprehensive report, or what you will see on reports before the state changed the name, was lowest performing, or where their entire population fell below the threshold to be so identified by the state. We have printed out for you at your spot, and it was attached to the presentation in board docs, a set of resources, available menus, if you will, to the schools. In order to be on the menu, they need to pass 3 tests. Are they allowable? Would they past what an auditor would say is allowable in the grant? Are they aligned? Do they go along with our curriculum? Right? We don't want to do something that isn't aligned with the curriculum, make it worse for students and staff. And then is it accessible? And that comes from our IT, IS department, our ed technology department. All of the laws go into this. Is it accessible? Once they pass those 3 tests, they go on to the supplemental resources menu and the professional learning menu. Our curriculum deans work in conjunction with our principals and school leadership team, Mr. Gallagher and team, on what do we want to see on there, what meets those 3 tests. It goes on there. Principals at their discretion get to select off the menu and allocate their Title I dollars for that. There are also positions on this discretionary personnel menu. And so there's a framework and inputs, outputs that go along for each of those positions. The buildings get to decide which of these positions, how many of them they will fund with their Title I allocation. Some resources that we make available to everybody in school administration, non-public, public, and charter is our manual. The link is live from your board docs presentation. You can see the manual. It will take you through more detail than you may care for. We also have lined out when schools get to refine their plans. Those are in amendment windows. That sheet will be for the coming school year. But at the heart of the matter, right down the middle, is that coaching support, strategic planning that comes to is it effective? And I'm going to turn it over for Mr. Gallagher for that portion.
Thank you. Yeah, as schools over the last 4 years, Title I or otherwise, their discretionary funding that they have available has increased for those type of positions that you saw on that previous slide. One thing that's critical for the support that the schools team supervisors provides to the principals is how are you measuring that you're getting a strong return on investment from these positions? So making sure that the principals understand what are the inputs that are delivered by these different positions? What are they actually supposed to be doing? What is their role within the school? What then should be the outputs from adding these positions from the discretionary menu so that ultimately you can see is there alignment that is effective alignment to getting the student outcomes that we would like to see. As we're moving into this next school year, we have established with the schools team a timeline that follows a very similar template to what Dr. Jarrett just provided to each of you in terms of your board calendar. And when we're looking at our calendar, we're identifying in the months of July and August before the school year starts, again, really making sure that the principals have the professional learning and understanding for the inputs, outputs, outcomes of those discretionary positions and resources so that as we move into the school year, we will know that we'll be able to do data-based effective progress monitoring to know if we're getting that return on investment so that we'll be meeting again, Dr. Brown, Dr. Travis, myself with the principals to do a check-in in October and again in February, both points in the school year where we've been able to get some baseline data to be able to measure whether we're getting that return on investment with those positions. And so with that said, we're available for any further questions that you may have.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I also request a report on the requested funds for the use of Title I and the denials and the reason why it was denied. And the main reason why I asked that the presentation is done so the general public can understand what Title I funds are for. And maybe a lot of community members don't realize the expansion of services that we provide for students that are not a part of RPS 205. But it is important that we assure parents and the public that we are using those funds to address and attack some of the severe needs that we have. So I'm really interested in, because word of mouth is one thing, and I know that we are data driven, so I'm sure that there's data on requests and denials, and so we can really take a look at that to see if there was something that possibly we missed that we could take a look at and do better in. So when will that portion be available?
I know Ms. Detman is working on that. I know of one out-and-out rejection, and that was for spiritware. That is not allowed in grant program. There are many things that are turnbacks, right? An account number is wrong, so that request gets turned back to the principal for corrections. It wasn't budgeted. It gets turned back to the principal so that during the next amendment, they can move their dollars around, resubmit it, and it gets approved then because they've allocated those funds for that. So I'm going to guess that of all Title I requests, over 99% that get turned back to a principal are merely for corrections, and then they go through. The one that I can recall off the top of my head is the spiritware one. You cannot do that with Title I, but I know that Ms. Detman was working on that, and I will follow up with her.
Thank you. And you mentioned that it is the school's choice and how to use the Title I funds. So if they choose not to use Title I funds, that's acceptable? Is that what you're saying?
No, the expectation is that we're always utilizing all the resources and finances we have available within our site-based budgets. But as we're revisiting the theory of action that a school would create from year to year with their budget plan, the example that I have that comes to mind after this last year, we maybe had a school that, for example, was allocating $150,000 towards tutoring. And they're seeing that with some maybe the behaviors and the social emotional needs of students that they need to make an adjustment or pivot their theory of action to maybe lessen the amount of dollars they would spend on tutoring so that they could increase the number of trauma therapist hours that would be available with counseling contracted with YSN or otherwise. So it's really making sure that we're looking at the data in front of us for evidence-based funding decisions and allocating our resources according to what those most urgent needs are, and making sure that as we look at that data, it's on an annual basis that it's responsive to what the most pressing needs are.
Thank you. So can you confirm the percentage of carryover? Is that 15%?
The normal carryover allowance is 15%. There were 2 federal waivers due to the pandemic that allowed 100%, but 15%, sorry, is the normal.
Okay, and is that our average, the 15%?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
We try and, we don't lose money, we don't not claim money, so we normally bounce between 13 and 15% carryover in Title I.
Okay, thank you very much.
Are there other questions? No? David, you look like you want to ask something.
Kind of I do, but I feel a bit of a disconnect when it comes to Title I dollars. You know, part of our governance is financial stewardship. We take a very, very close look at how we spend our local dollars, and we have done, I think, a pretty remarkable job of being responsible with that money. The Title I dollars is very different. Obviously, the fund is much more remote from our control in getting it, but also in the spending, since it's really done at the school level. But it occurs to me that there should also be some sort of a mechanism that would be for the board, to help the board figure out, are we applying the same sort of financial stewardship there? And I guess not at the same level of like applying, metrics to the superintendent's contract, saying how is he spending Title I dollars, and what are the outcomes. But you talk about feedback that you'll give based on, how schools are reporting money being spent and how effective it is. How does this end up becoming meaningful to the board? Because it just seems like the income is very specific, the spend is very specific. How does the board make sense of that?
Put in simple terms that still need to be ironed out by the board. As we now have a baseline year and moving forward into August, October, we'll be able to identify which schools fall in the red, yellow, green, or blue. Depending on the level that they fall in, they would have increased or lessened autonomy for how they would spend those discretionary dollars. So that a school that was in the red would have tighter parameters on what would be available based off of the coaching and supervision provided by my team.
Thank you. That's exactly what I was looking for. Appreciate it.
Ms. Pearson?
Yes, I do have another question. And I would probably do a lot of emailing, but just for the sake of knowledge. So it was a question asked not long ago about efforts in retaining our teachers. And we understand that it is, teachers are on a contract. So there's not a whole lot can be done if it's not negotiated, to my understanding. But one of the things, items that's listed is salaries, stipends for school counselors. So salary / stipends for school counselors. So given the needs that we have, specifically in our reading level, could we be strategic enough to create ways that teachers could be utilized greater and provided stipends? Because early on, I was doing another presentation, I was told that it wasn't possible. And I remember Mr. Wolf giving me, and thank you, Mr. Wolf, for taking the time to meet with me early on. There's so much information that comes to you at once. It takes a bit to digest. So in that information that was provided, there are many opportunities for the Title I dollars to be utilized, and I just want to make sure that that's happening.
We're going to tag team this answer. So $13 million approximately of the $20.5 million for FY23 is going to salaries for additional personnel in buildings, parent liaisons, Title I teachers, and some of those other supports. The therapist that was addressed, counseling contracts, et cetera. We also annually budget at the school level about $1.5 million for tutoring. All of those tutoring dollars go to licensed teachers. So that would be that stipend that is allowed. We also use title funds to provide professional development stipends and contracts. So there is quite a bit of that. And in fact, 92.4% of all Title I dollars are budgeted at our school level. So, Mr. Gallagher.
Not much to add. Just as an example, when we just got this recent influx of additional Title I dollars at 37 schools and had a very quick turnaround to determine how that money was going to be spent, the emphasis that my team placed on the principals was to spend that money precisely how you identified, which is extended day extended school year and professional learning boot camps for teachers outside of the regular 7 hours a day, 174 hours, because trying to put it all towards allocations right now, we know that there's staffing shortages across the country, and the timeliness of being able to find qualified candidates to spend those additional dollars on human resource for next year during the 7 hours a day, 174 days, just wouldn't make sense. So we emphasize precisely what you're speaking towards when we had this last amendment cycle.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Connor.
Can you remind me in the school dashboard, is the Title I money reflected there, and is it tracked year over year at all by school?
So these site-based school expenditure reporting, it doesn't break Title I out separately. It has all federal dollars in there. So IDEA dollars would be included in there, you know, for special education. So they're not broken out separately, although they can be seen as a composite number of federal dollars per school by school.
So I'm going to take that to mean that if you really want to know what the spend is year over year, school by school, you'd have to do that yourself.
Yeah,
you'd have to calculate all that yourself.
Well, and I'm just not sure how. I mean, we track it by school, obviously, you know, in the financial statements, but we don't report specific Title I dollars by school through the financial statements. You see, you know, compiled statements.
Right.
You know.
I think one of the comments I've got is that it seems like there's questions on how the money might be allocated by school, and so it might be interesting for us, maybe as an experiment. I don't want to give somebody a lot of work, but it would be interesting to see year over year how schools have allocated their Title I, and then side by side with that, see what the results are for that particular school. Just, I mean, that's true, I think, of funding in general, because there's often questions about how the funding is allocated by school, and since we're tracking the decisions that principals are making by school, this might be something that would be of interest for us.
Absolutely. Part of the meetings that we're having in July and August that I had referenced with the principals, where it'll be Dr. Wolf, Dr. Brown, and myself, will be sitting down with principals for a protocol of evidence-based funding. So effectively what we'll be looking at is a variety of metrics, but it boils down to looking at how are you allocating all of your dollars right now? What does the amount of evidence-based funding that you have look like relative to what is recommended by the state? And what does the state actually recommend in terms of a distribution of allocations, so that we'll be able to say to the schools, maybe, you know, we don't receive the full amount of evidence-based funding that we should from the state of Illinois, but depending on how we supplement that evidence-based funding from the state with the other discretionary dollars we have at our disposal, we would be able to say, well, this is how you decided to allocate your dollars versus what a calculation from ISB might look like, and you were actually funded at 110% of what is recommended, but maybe your ELA growth or your math growth is only at 4% or 5%. So in essence, we'll be able to start looking at similar dashboard metrics to what you're speaking of, so that we can compare at an aggregate level, school by school, are you effectively spending your dollars to actually get the right outcomes for students?
So it's interesting you brought up the state. The state is really a different funding mechanism, and it does bring the question to my mind, is there a coordination between the evidence-based and the Title I in terms of outcomes?
Yeah, so the evidence-based funding model really gets to the heart of the the supplant that Travis was talking about, where the Title I dollars are supposed to come in up and above. So the evidence-based funding model is designed to provide a basic level of support for all the schools that are in the district. So that's kind of the baseline of what they're providing. Now, you know, we're resourced at about 64, 65% of what we should receive from the state. So that's about all the state gives us. So we make up the rest of the money with local dollars and then all these federal dollars that we receive from the program. So we use the evidence-based funding dollars and our local dollars to provide that base level of support to all of our schools. So everybody essentially is going to get resourced the same on that. Where the federal money comes in, it goes up and above that base level of support that we provide, and it's that incremental money, that supplementing that goes on with the federal dollars, whether it be, you know, the Title I or the 1003A or whatever other federal dollars we have available. Those are the things that kick in and go up and above for our schools that have high poverty rates, you know, those kinds of things where this money is supposed to be targeted and go towards those. I don't know exactly how the calculation gets done, and Travis can probably help explain that with how the money gets allocated, you know, to the individual schools, because that's something that they work on over in their department. But there are really pretty prescriptive rules on how that additional supplemental money that we get from Title I is allocated back out to the schools. So I'll maybe you can explain that a little better than I can.
Sure. So we rank all of the schools in descending order, the highest poverty count, because we are a community eligibility program, CEP district. We use the direct certification. It's the report that we get from the state of all students who qualified through a direct certification program. We rank those schools, and then we allocate the dollars following that. So the school with the highest concentration of poverty must receive the greatest amount per student. They have to be higher than everyone below them. So
and you're being specific to Title I on that?
Yes, sir. Yep. So there's a 5-step part. We have to take all of the youth age 5 to 17 in our geographic. We have to plot where the Boylan students would go and put those students as if they went to Guilford, Auburn, et cetera. We'll show you all of the documentation if you're interested in it, but really the higher the concentration of poverty at the school, the more money per student they get. And we use the March 31 direct certification file that we receive from the state of Illinois every year as the official count.
And so to be clear for me, when we do the dashboards or the net results by school, is that a number that we show by school, what you just described?
So we certainly have that report that we could provide. It is not called out, as Dr. Brown said, in the site-based expenditure report, but it's an annual calculation based on the students that we're serving in that school.
Right. I think, and I don't want to belabor this anymore, but I think the suggestion I've got here is that one of the common questions that I've heard year after year relates to how that's done. And if I might say so, my sense of it is that people want to look at that by school. Sure. And furthermore, the thing that I would say is that it's year over year, because I would like to know, you know, has the school trended up, down, or the same? And so one of the suggestions for showing it by school is that it seems to me that that's a calculus that every principal has to make. So if I understood you correctly, you have different categories, and that is part of their thinking on how they're going to allocate all those funds or make requests for funds. And I think one of the things that I'll say is after almost 10 years on the board, that process to me is relatively opaque and probably, no offense to the description because you're all experts, but I think for the average person, that's a lot of detail. And so showing by school And the trend, I think, would help so people could see money and results side by side. And I will also say that, yes, I understand the state gives us, if you will, steady funding for the base, is that's also part of the calculation, if I remember correctly, so that each principal has that in mind when they decide how they're going to spend, say, the Title I dollars. So I think my suggestion is that if that's a little bit more transparent for the public, I think you might really satisfy a number of questions where somebody can just say, well, I think that school gets less. And the fact is that's not true at all, that you would have the hard numbers by the school, and you would also give us, because the question was earlier, what does that mean to the board? Well, I know as a board member, one of the things that comes out of this is, how do the principals understand all this, frankly, and how do they know what to request and allocate for their own needs by school? So, and I'm sure you all know, it's just, as a board member, I think, and again, I'm not trying to add a ton of work, so I apologize if it sounds that way, but I would at least like you to address the kinds of things that you could show that would make sense, that differentiate by school, that's, I think, from a public standpoint, relatively easy to digest.
There's been a distinction here that I think has confused the issue. Mr. Connor, we can break down for every school trend data by funding source, and all of our principals have that information, and we've shared that with the board. Right. I think what they were referring to is what is posted publicly on the state report card.
I understand.
And so I think what we will do is just make sure we give that site-by-site trend data as quickly as possible to the board so you can see what that looks like.
Yeah, I think as long as we understand the factors that the principals are using and how the money is allocated, because I will say this, you know, this is one of those where a lot of the information is given, but it's it's how it's given and under what umbrella. Especially, it seems to me that more and more we are becoming either dependent on, or it's really getting to get much more scrutiny by school. And so I would say that that's probably one of the litmus tests that I would use. If you've got it buried in a report, probably not as helpful as if it's right there in the dashboard so that we can see some of these aspects. That was really the only point I would make.
Can I ask a clarifying question, Mr. Connor? Are you asking how we allocate the money to schools from the state, or how the schools choose to allocate the money that they get from the state?
So that is in fact part of my question, because it sounds like some of it is by formula. So in other words, the state says you got to do it this way. The feds have particular laws, and that's fine. This is really about how the schools decide to spend that money, because in the end, I think what everybody wants to know is what is each school doing to address the issues and the decision-making behind how they get those funds. Okay, thank you.
Ms. Stanford.
Can I ask one question? You mentioned something about the private school children go into our calculation. Can you explain that to me a little better?
Sure. So a district receives an allocation of Title I funds based on all eligible youth who are below the federal poverty line, whether they are in a private non-public school or in a school district. We cannot send federal dollars, though, to the school. And so what we do, they get services. So we meet with the non-public schools annually in an official consultation meeting. We then do periodic, every month or so, follow-up meetings. We provide tutoring by and large and the supplies for the tutors to work with students who are at risk of failure to meet academic standards. So there is a percentage of the funds that come into the state, from the state, that is equal to the percentage of eligible students in those schools.
So the income level of those particular students is not going to affect what funds we get at some of our schools?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, one last thing. So RPS 205 is responsible for the funding for both the public and private sector for education, correct or no?
I'd like to narrow
Title
that.
I.
In Title I, we provide services, yes, for that.
I have a question. Just, you talked about whether or not you're a red, blue, green school, the amount of assistance you receive in terms of how you spend your money, your Title I funds. But then how do we go back and determine that the items that are chosen for different schools have made a difference or been improved as compared to what we're doing with our regular programs? How do we know that the right ones were chosen? Were they, I mean, what is the evidence-based, or what kind of metrics are we looking at to determine whether or not that's the right thing for the next year, or whether we need to do something else?
That has been something that's been a work in progress over the last year with Matt Zedeker and HR working with schools team and focus group principals, as well as various central office staff, to identify what I had mentioned earlier. For any of the particular positions, what are the inputs? So effectively, what's the job description? What should they be doing? What are the outputs? What do we expect to get out of that? And then finally, how should that affect student outcomes? So for any of the different positions that we have available on the discretionary menu, Title I or otherwise, having identified the inputs, the outputs, and the outcomes, the meetings that we're having with principals over the course of July and August is to provide that professional learning so that they understand what structures they need to have in place in their buildings, what kind of teams they need to have in place, so that they can progress monitor, are they getting those outcomes? Does a parent liaison with an off-track caseload of freshman students actually impact the number of those off-track students getting on track through whether it be the inputs of doing home visits or doing some lunchtime advisory or goal setting or otherwise, making sure that that's precisely the work that we're in right now in training the principals July and August.
And all these digital and other pieces on the menu, how do you determine which ones of those are effective? I mean, if we're recommending, especially to a red school, what they should be using, we need to have something to show that we think, why we think that's the right one, and whether or not we made a good choice that year.
Across the array of items that we would have available, it would be that same process. Is, you know, we determine what is most leverageable and what has the biggest bang for the buck or return on investment based off of the outputs and the outcomes that we're getting versus the investment and what we're inputting.
But you can't really dissect is the wrong word. You can't really say that this was because of Title I specifically as compared to what the student was receiving in their regular education.
Ms. McCulloch, you're exactly right. There are real limitations. You get into issues of causality at some point. It's an incredibly complex mix of variables. And so the best we can do is attempt to attribute whether it's a supplemental curriculum resource or a positional resource. We do our best to tie it to a specific output and to then determine if that output occurred. And then you are always monitoring the lagging indicator, which is student achievement ultimately improving year over year. But you are correct in your assessment that this is not an easy thing to attribute to any one specific purchase. Typically, you're looking more at, is the whole package of investments improving student achievement?
And to your point on private, because I had that as a question here, if we have red schools and we're telling them what they need and what they have to use, do we tell the private schools how to spend their money, or do they get to make those choices?
That annual consultation meeting is where we discuss the general program. We offer one program for all of the schools. We provide tutoring. Almost always it is a recently retired licensed teacher. The funding model allows more service hours at a school doing that way than hiring 4 teachers that would use up about that amount of money. And so it is going to be based on reading and math standards. That's where the program is. The non-public schools appreciate the tutoring, and we buy very, very few other items for them.
So we do the same thing for all the private schools in terms of the support with a retired teacher for tutoring. That's
In
what
general,
I heard you say.
Yeah. Tutoring is the largest, very, very largest portion of services that we provide there.
And they've never come and asked us to make their own decisions?
They're part of that. We changed the model several years ago when we had one full-time teacher. The allocations were much lower then. And some of the schools literally got 4 hours worth of service because that's all their student count generated. And so we went to this model where we have a current licensed teacher who is responsible for assessment and working with the individual school faculty on what they're going to tutor, and works with the tutor to deliver that. So the schools are highly involved in this specific tutoring, but we don't have, you can buy an online service and you have to have a tutor.
But the students who are receive services in these private schools are all identified as Title students. I mean, it doesn't go to the entire school, correct?
Yeah, correct, ma'am.
Okay. Mr. Connor.
Yeah, you said something that piqued my interest. You were saying that you had training for the principals, if I heard you correctly. Is that something that has, I've got a couple questions. One is, has that occurred every year over a period of time? The training of this, is that part of the onboarding of a principal, or is this specific because it changes so much year after year?
No, it's something that certainly has been going on for the duration of time that we've been engaged in doing the site-based budgeting. Given the length of my tenure in the position, I wouldn't be able to speak too in depth about necessarily what was provided before, but I can tell you that I definitely benefited in my tenure as a principal from professional learning that was provided through our consultancy with the DMG group in first helping us to get to understand in the evolution of this budgeting process. Where we first started was understanding what are the urgent needs, what should be our theory of action, and whatever our theory action is should determine what are our research-based strategies that we will invest in. So that was like step one in the process in the development of the professional learning of the principals. What we're getting into right now is much more nuanced in my belief in this evolution in how we're getting down to a much more granular level, looking at the inputs and the outputs to determine are we getting the bang for the buck.
So are you saying that as we refine our approach to onboarding our principals, that we're giving them the training they need to work their way through this? I mean, one of the things I'm just going to say out loud, hey, I'm an old guy, I can say stuff out loud, thank you very much, is that, you know, you hear some of this, and the question I've got is, if I walked up to the average principal and said, can you explain this to me, what would their answer be? And I suggest that probably part of the answer would be, you know, I pay attention to it, you know, when I have to do some of this, but it really sounds like the key is them as principals understanding exactly as you said, Mr. Gallagher. So I would think that it would be part of the onboarding of the principal position, and it would be recorded by the dashboard or the measurement for them. So that would be maybe a suggestion that.
Sure.
Yeah, this is, the one thing I'll say is that I'm truly glad, I will just say this, we've had a number of questions about Title I. Title I is one of those things that we've talked about year after year, but I think you're right, there's a lot of detail, and we don't need to know every piece of detail, but I think we do need to know how it affects the schools, and as the superintendent said, the outcomes. And that is something that I know I'm keenly both aware of and interested in. So as you go through on this, some of the things that we've talked about would be nice for there to be a follow-up for us to understand some of this better.
Certainly.
Yeah, thank you.
I would say, Mr. Connor, that I know quite a few principals who feel like they really know what they want, and the concern expressed to me has always been, not by everybody, because we don't talk a lot of Title I, but when something comes up, it's a denial or, the hoops they had to jump through to prove that what they wanted was something they should have for their building. I don't know if that is in line somewhat with what Ms. Pearson asked earlier, that they just didn't get the right paperwork in, there was timing, there was this or that. But I'm hoping to hear less of that as we develop our dashboards and the schools that are doing well and are getting to make their own choices instead of being having to go through so much work to prove that what they would think will work in their school, that they're given the opportunity to use it. All right, last question. Go for it.
So this is just a quick statement. So just to give you some positive feedback, Subdistrict A has a lot of needs, needless to say, and Title I funding have really been a blessing to some of the schools. So it's not like the schools are being neglected. There is some concern of some denials, but I think overall, as I have visited some schools, I've gotten positive feedback on what they were able to do with the Title I funding. It's just those other areas, small areas that, we would like to see make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you. I very much appreciate ending on the positive note, and we are certainly collectively always involved in process improvement for making it easier for the end user, the principal.
Thank you. All right. Dr. Jarrett, do you have anything else for during your?
That concludes my report.
All right. We're now on to the consent portion of our meeting, which includes the items previewed by the board committee chairs during the committee of the whole meeting. So we have the payroll, accounts payable, purchase orders for fiscal year 22, purchase orders for fiscal year 23, construction pay request log, monthly cash and investment report for May 2022, the financial results for May 2022, the Reed Group leave of absence administration, the CPI contract extension, the meeting minutes of 6/14/22, contract purchase orders for fiscal year 22, contract purchase orders for fiscal year 23, closed session minutes released from 6/14, and freedom of information log. Is there a motion and a second to approve consent items?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Are there any consent items board members wish to have pulled for separate consideration? Mr. Siegel?
6A.
And anybody else? Okay, I'd ask the coordinator to call the roll on the consent items not pulled.
Ms. Pearson?
Yes?
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
The motion passes with 5 yeses, 2 absent.
Thank you. I'll entertain a motion to accept the meeting minutes of 6/14/22.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. And any conversation? Coordinator, please call the roll on item 6A, meeting minutes from 6/14/22.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Abstain.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
Ms. Pearson?
Yes.
The motion passes with 4 yeses, 1 abstain, 2 absent.
Thank you. All right, sit back, and here we go. We're now on to the closed session consent agenda, including the following. The appointment of Ryan Miller as a 10-month elementary dean at Haskell. Appointment of John McClintock as the 10-month assistant elementary principal at Westview. The appointment of Brian Lamb as a 10-month assistant elementary principal at Ellis. Appointment of Joseph Ferguson as the 10-month middle school assistant principal at Eisenhower. The appointment of Diane Berogan as a 10-month dean from the NIU cohort at Ellis. Appointment of Viviana Salinas as the 10-month dean for the NIU cohort for the high school. The appointment of Christopher Berrigan as a 10-month dean for the NIU cohort at Jefferson. I believe that Ms. Salinas will be at Auburn. Do I have that correct? Thank you. The appointment of Sarah Craig as the 11-month...
Apologies. Viviana Salinas will be appointed at Jefferson.
And Christopher Berrigan?
Christopher Berrigan is at Auburn.
Okay, so let's switch those two. I'm going to reread Viviana Salinas as a 10-month dean at Jefferson, Christopher Berrigan as a 10-month dean at Auburn. Sarah Craig as an 11-month elementary principal at Westview. Desiree Reitzel as an 11-month early childhood principal at Nashhold. Alvina Ivy as a 12-month director of instruction. Kimberly Jensen as a 12-month curriculum dean. Craig Pate as a 12-month program administrator for special education. The HR organizational report and addendum, as well as the following student discipline. 2061 will be expelled through the entire 22-23 school year. 2062 will be expelled through the entire 22-23 school year. 4551 will be expelled through the entire 22-23 school year. 4552 will be expelled through the entire 22-23 school year. 4553, the expulsion is held in abeyance contingent upon an expulsion and abeyance agreement for the entire 22-23 school year. 4557 will be expelled through the entire 22-23 school year and the entire 23-24 school year. 4558, the expulsion is held in abeyance contingent upon an expulsion and abeyance agreement for the entire 22-23 school year. 4559 will be expelled through the entire 22-23 school year. 4560, the expulsion is held in abeyance contingent upon an expulsion and abeyance agreement for the entire 22-23 school year. 4561, the expulsion is held in abeyance contingent upon an expulsion and abeyance agreement for the entire 22-23 school year. 4562 is expelled through the entire 22-23 school year. 4563 is expelled through the entire 22-23 school year. 4519, the 2-day suspension is affirmed. For 5020, the 1-day suspension is affirmed. We'll also be affirming the following EIAs: 1130, 8660, 8661, 8662, 8663, 8664, 8665, 8666, 8667, 8668, 8669, 8670, 8672, 8676, 8677, 8678, and 8679. I'd entertain a motion and a second to approve the closed session consent items.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Are there any closed session consent items that board members wish to have pulled? Ms. Pearson.
Yes, thank you. 2062, 4551, 4552, and 4559.
What was the first one? I'm sorry.
2062.
Thank you. Do I need to identify those by item number, or is just the number all right, Ms. Hoadley?
Would you like for me to repeat?
Nope, we're getting it. Yeah, thank you. All right. We just want to make sure we have them all right. And shall I take those as a group when we get to them?
That's fine.
Okay. So I would enter, we do have a motion and a second, and there can be no discussion because it's closed session. So will the moderator please call the roll on all the closed session items with the exception of 8B, C, D, and H.
Mr. Siegel,
Yes.
Mr. Connor,
Yes.
Ms. Stanford,
Yes.
Ms. Pearson,
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch.
Yes.
The motion passes with 5 yeses, 2 absent.
Thank you. I'll entertain a motion for items, to approve items 8B, C, D, and H.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Again, no discussion, so I'll ask the moderator to call the roll. Coordinator, sorry.
Mr. Connor,
Yes.
Ms. Stanford,
Yes.
Ms. Pearson,
No.
Mrs. McCulloch,
Yes.
Mr. Siegel.
Yes.
The motion passes with 4 yeses, 1 no, 2 absent.
Are there any other items of business, new business, other business, agenda recommendations that board members might wish to bring forward? Seeing no lights before we adjourn, before I call about that, remember you have an exit slip, and I'm going to ask you to give them to Ms. Hoadley. And I don't think we got a tabulation from the last meeting in June, so maybe we could put those together and send those out to the board. And I know that moving forward, Dr. Jarrett was going to follow up as part of, with any of the comments that were made, what is happening with the people who come to speak to us. I don't think we had any other questions outstanding. I think our Title, Ms. Pearson, did you still have some Title I questions that were outstanding that you're waiting for a return on, just so we?
There, Ms. Detman is working on it.
Okay, so duly noted. I just wanted to make sure that we close out with all that. And everybody knows that our first meeting of the month, our Committee of the Whole, is not next week. It'll be the second Tuesday in July, and then we'll only have the one other full board meeting on July 19th. All right, I'll entertain a motion and a second to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed, same sign. We are adjourned at 8:20. Boy.